Welcome to another episode of Uninsured by Choice, the podcast where we help you navigate the healthcare system without insurance. I'm your host, Dan, and we are brought to you by our sponsor, Zion Health Share, a nonprofit medical cost sharing community that provides a better alternative to health insurance. And today I am joined by Mark Messick. Mark is the marketing director for Common Care, a tech platform that helps employers structure and administer creative group health plans that expand employee choice beyond traditional insurance. He's a big advocate of taking responsibility for both your health and your healthcare expenses. He's been proudly uninsured for years and enjoys it probably a little too much when certain people get extremely triggered by that. I've definitely been there and can relate to that as well. So, Mark, thanks for being on and joining us today.
Yeah, of course. Happy to be here.
Yeah, excellent. So let's just dive right in. Something we've talked about in the past is the uninsured part of the podcast name, Uninsured by Choice. We have not spent a lot of time talking about that by choice part. And you had a really good insight on that as far as why so few people really can make that choice. So why don't you elaborate a bit about the whole employer space and how that relates to how so many people get their coverage?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm coming at this from maybe a little bit of a different angle than some of your previous guests, just because we work mostly in the employer space. We work with employer health plans, which is where a huge percentage of the population currently gets their health coverage is through their employer. And at most employers, people do not have much of a choice at all in what their health coverage is. Maybe there's a few different tiers they can pick from, but they're usually still limited to one carrier, one type of coverage. And so there really isn't that much variety in what they can choose, which it doesn't take too long thinking about that to realize that's kind of a problem, because even at a very small company, 10, 20 employees, you're already going to have people who are different ages, different family sizes, different health needs. And it just doesn't make any sense at all to put all of those people with all those different backgrounds onto one kind of coverage. And so a lot of what we do is helping employers take a step back and say, hold on, we've kind of painted ourselves into a corner here by just doing things the way that they've always been done. Let's reevaluate and set up a health plan in a way where each employee can choose whatever coverage is best for them. And that's going to look different for someone who's young and single and never goes to the doctor, and someone who's maybe aging or has a few kids or has some serious health conditions. And so we want everyone to be able to customize their health plan to themselves. That's a growing movement. A lot of employers are adopting that. It hasn't been the status quo for a very long time.
So I'm curious about that. Why has it not been the status quo? Why has the way of doing things always been the one size fits all approach? I guess it was kind of like post World War II that this whole concept of employer providing all these benefits really started to take shape. But it's kind of always been this way. Why is that if it's not really a great way or a great system? How did we get here?
Yeah, it's a good question. My answer will definitely be speculative in nature. During World War II and in the aftermath, that's when employer-sponsored benefits really rose up. And I believe the legend that during World War II, employers had some limitations put on them that they couldn't raise wages for employees, but they still needed to recruit and hire. And so a clever workaround to that was offering other kinds of non-cash benefits, one of the big ones being health insurance. Back in the 1940s, health insurance looked a lot different than it does today. My understanding is that there were not that many carrier options. You maybe only had one carrier covering your area. The genesis of this started with not that much choice. And as things progressed, we just kind of stayed in that rut of you just pick one carrier. There definitely is something to be said for it is administratively a lot easier to just pick one carrier, you pay one invoice and you're done. Having multiple carriers, multiple selections, it definitely adds some administrative complexity. Nowadays, with technology, all of that is pretty easy to automate away. It's actually not that much more complicated to offer a plan that allows each employee to choose whatever they want. Not that many decades ago, that wasn't the case. So those are a few reasons that I think probably things evolved the way that they did.
Well, that's pretty interesting because World War II ended about 80 years ago, I think. And we're in 2026 using a legacy benefit system that was designed for a specific use case of wage flattening or whatever was going on, wage suppression. And I'm sure there was some reason at the time for that. And there was a reason that employers got into this whole racket of benefits and health insurance and whatnot. But the fact that we still have that same system when so much has changed, both on the carrier side, the plan types, coverage types, information, there's so much that has changed. And yet here we are still stuck in this old way of doing things. So what is the solution? How would an employer come to terms with, I don't have to do things the way they've always been done? Suppose I'm an employer, I have employees, or I'm an HR leader and I have the benefits of several people that I kind of oversee or manage. What could I do that maybe could start providing some choice to the employees? It might be administratively a little more on my end to administer that. Yes, we understand. But would it be a lot more? Would it be fairly straightforward to do? What would be the steps that we would look at there?
It's a good question. I don't want this to turn into a big pitch for Common Care and what we do, but I will say that I think that we have made it very easy to administer one of these employee choice plans compared to the traditional setup. The decision that needs to be made is whether you think it's a good strategy or not. If you think it's a good strategy, the barriers to entry are quite low. And the reason that I said in some ways it's easier is because currently the owner, the HR person, has to complete an impossible task, which is go out and find one solution that is going to keep as many people as possible happy at your company. And it's like, you couldn't even keep everyone happy with the menu for the company barbecue. Of course, you can't keep everyone happy by picking one health plan for everyone with this broad range of needs. It's outside of the scope of what most business people and HR people are good at. They don't do this for their entire career and profession most of the time. Your time and resources would be better spent focused on basically anything else at your company, making it a better company, providing a better working opportunity for your employees. So all you really need to do is set a budget and then get out of the way and let your employees decide. They already know what they want. They can go and find it from a menu of nice options. And so that's why I say that in some ways it's easier, is you're now no longer having to be in the driver's seat on a mission that is impossible to complete to the satisfaction of all of your employees. You can instead just open up the buffet, give all of your employees a plate, and then let them go and serve themselves however they please.
I love that kind of imagery there, where it's more of this cafeteria style, take what works for you. I'd love to talk about something I've read a bit about and I know a little bit about, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners probably know a little bit about this, but one mechanism for that would be an ICRA, is one mechanism that would be available to a business owner. So for those who might not be familiar with what that is, whether they're business owner or employee that maybe wants to ask a business owner or their employer about this, could you walk through what that is and how that might fit into this strategy of maybe starting to offer a little bit of choice?
Happy to do that. I'll start with a preface, which is that I kind of hate ICRAs. I think that they can be a useful tool, but they pretend to be the entire solution when they're not. ICRAs give the illusion of more choice. And yeah, now you can choose between Blue Cross and United. That's great. It's actually not even that great because you're still limited to pretty terrible options for most of your people. Giving employees more choice when all of the options still kind of suck is only so much progress. That's my little beef with ICRAs. However, that being said, they can be a very useful compliance tool, especially for larger employers who have to meet certain conditions under the ACA. ICRAs can help check some boxes, but what's a lot more useful vehicle is actually a cafeteria plan because it doesn't constrain funds. The IRS came out and said a few years ago, hey, employers, you need to meet certain criteria when you offer a group health plan. You need to offer plans that meet, these benchmarks. Up to this point, you've only been able to buy one group policy to do that. Now, we would consider that these requirements have been met if you simply reimburse your employees for purchasing their own individual coverage. So ICRAs are a legal route where employees can purchase their own coverage and be reimbursed by the employer. So it does give individual choice. The issue with ICRAs is that they still limit employees to just ACA regulated plans, the big box carrier plans that still kind of suck. And so you've given employees more choice, but they're still limited to not the best options for a lot of them.
Okay, I understand now. That's making sense. So what an ICRA is doing is saying, instead of a one-size-fits-all insurance plan for the employer, we're making a bunch of other insurance plans available to you as employees, but we're still only working with insurance plans. So for example, if my employer said, hey, we're going to have an ICRA, we'll reimburse you for what plan you want to go get. And I say, I want to join a health share, or I want to get an indemnity plan, or I want to do a DPC membership or something like that. The ICRA cannot reimburse me for that. There's no legal mechanism there with the IRS for that. So is there a account type, a fund of any kind where an employer could say, hey, you want to go the uninsurance route? That's great. That's fine. Here's what we can do for you for that. Or does that not even exist? Is that something we need to be looking at from a regulatory standpoint to get added into the repertoire, so to speak?
So you definitely can do that, exactly what you're asking. You do give up some tax advantage, which is usually a pretty good trade-off. Utilizing a cafeteria plan alongside an ICRA, employers and employees can actually have the best of both worlds. The ICRA checks some compliance boxes and says, we're offering coverage that meets these requirements. They shouldn't put all of that money in the ICRA, because as soon as the money goes into the ICRA, it is trapped there. It can only go to the designated insurance options. Instead, what they should do is put the funds towards a cafeteria plan, which is aptly named. It allows employees to choose from, a menu of different options, including taking the cash home as a taxable bonus. And so from the cafeteria plan, you can route it towards things like dental and vision. So pre-tax benefits, you can route it towards a 401k. You can take it home as a taxable bonus. And when you do that, when you take it home, you can use it on health shares and some of these alternative options. And so when you do that, you are paying taxes on the funds versus if you routed it towards a traditional insurance option, it would be pre-tax. The vast majority of the time, the savings of going towards something like health share is going to be far outweighed by whatever small tax advantage you're giving up.
Okay, so cafeteria plan, walk me through what that is. Is that the official name, or is that just the sort of common term used, or is that the official name of something that a employer could go ask, say they have a broker right now. Could they say, hey, broker, I'm interested in a cafeteria plan. What could we do there? Is that something that's just available right now widely for people?
Yeah. So cafeteria plan is synonymous with Section 125 of the tax code, which is the portion of the tax code that just says that the IRS says we would allow these things. Employers can contribute funds, and employees can also contribute funds to a cafeteria plan via salary reduction. If they want to contribute more of their own money, they can. Employers and employees can contribute towards whatever options have been set up within the cafeteria plan or the Section 125 plan. So yeah, these are standard industry terms that you could go and ask someone about. I will say that a lot of people are not that creative with how they're arranging Section 125 and ICRAs. Most people are not allowing their employees to go and purchase health shares. And if they are, they're doing it slightly illegally. But there definitely is a compliant way to, line up all of your ducks and have the best of both worlds, where you can meet all of the compliance requirements and also allow your employees access to these awesome off marketplace, off ACA options.
And see, that's what we're about, is being uninsured by choice. So the ICRA on its own maybe gives you the choice, but not the uninsurance part. The uninsurance alone without choice doesn't really work on that end. So we're talking about trying to make a hybrid there.
You can always opt out of your employer health plan, but then you're foregoing some of your compensation effectively, right? Like they were going to contribute $400 a month to your insurance. If you opt out of that, you just gave up $4,800 this year that the employer would have paid towards a benefit for you. So under the traditional option, you're right, it kind of locks you in where it's use it or lose it. And so most people don't go this route of uninsured because they don't want to give up money that they can only use in this one silo.
And that makes sense. HSAs are very similar, where there's employers that will contribute to your HSA, which is fine and great because we all incur health expenses throughout the year. That's pretty normal. Maybe not hundreds of thousands of dollars, but hundreds of dollars, urgent care, whatever, wellness visits, stuff like that. So that makes sense. If you get a significant portion of your salary into an HSA, it's just there and it can only be used for health expenses. I think a lot of people don't really understand that about an HSA. They think that it's free money or whatever. And yeah, it can be if it's an employer contribution, but it is limited to specific types of expenses, just like this ICRA is limited to certain types of uses. So it's always going to be better on the choice side to get money in the most flexible way, I guess you could say, that you can kind of use it in a wide range of options. So previously when we were talking, you mentioned that people kind of fall into one of three buckets. And walk us through those three buckets, kind of what type of people fall in those and what options are best for them. And I think that'll help people understand why this choice is so necessary, because there's different categories of people with totally different needs.
Yeah, absolutely. So having choice is great, but it is a little bit of a double-edged sword, because as soon as you have choice, you have to think hard and make a decision. It's always difficult, especially in healthcare. Seems to be designed to be especially complex. And so everyone knows kind of the panic of going to healthcare.gov or talking to a broker, putting your phone number into a website promising quotes for health insurance, and then getting 13,000 calls from people all across the country. Like, it is not a fun journey to determine what kind of health coverage to have for yourself. Whether you're going through one of these ICRA/cafeteria plan, employer sponsored options, or you're just an individual and you're just totally on your own, separate from any employer plan, in both cases, it can be a nightmare to determine what health coverage is best for your family. And most people end up just getting frustrated at some point and essentially throwing a dart in the dark and picking whatever plan based on whatever kind of limited criteria that they had arrived at. And very few people are very confident that they have made a good decision. There's a lot of just kind of like, yeah, I went with it, but who knows if this was good or not. And most people actually think that it probably wasn't good. Most people hate their health plans, is my experience in having lots of these conversations. So all of that preamble to say, one of the big things that we do as we help employers implement this is meet with employees one-on-one to help them determine what health coverage is right for you. We've built some really advanced analysis tools that run hundreds of thousands of simulations for each individual household to do the math and figure out which plans are likely to keep their costs the lowest over a long time horizon. As we've done that, some trends have emerged. Everyone is going to fall into one of three buckets or categories for what kind of health coverage is best for you. So bucket number one, you have a large premium tax credit or a large ACA subsidy. If you do, and you can get traditional Blue Cross or United plan for free or close to free, it's hard to complain too much about that. We can complain a lot about the quality of the coverage, the networks, the bloodthirsty insurance companies. There's still plenty to complain about, but from a dollars and cents perspective, free or close to free is pretty good. So that's bucket number one. If you have a large premium tax credit or ACA subsidy, might as well use it. Bucket number two is you don't have a tax credit and you're relatively healthy. Your main use for health insurance is just in case an emergency happens, something unexpected. And you probably have some routine healthcare expenses as well, maybe the occasional specialist visit and maybe some generic meds, just normal average. Bucket number two is that those people are almost always going to want to go with a health share, go with a non-insurance alternative for a whole host of reasons that we can get into. Health shares are way more financially sensible for most people who don't have extreme healthcare needs. Health shares work a lot more like car insurance, or a lot more like health insurance used to work in 1945, is very different from how insurance works today. And that is a good thing. Insurance today, health insurance today, is terrible for a lot of reasons. Bucket number three is that you don't have a tax credit and you have pretty severe health needs, ongoing health needs, and you're consuming $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year worth of healthcare expenses. If that's you, then you probably still want to be on a traditional insurance plan. It's going to be very expensive because all of the traditional insurance plans without a tax credit are very expensive. They will cover you from day one, even with pre-existing conditions. If you paid $20,000 a year for your coverage, but you're consuming $40,000 a year in healthcare, then that's a good deal for you, and you should do it until the system implodes, So those are the three categories that we see people fall into. Everyone listening to this, what category you fall into pretty easily from just a quick description, and that gives you a pretty good idea of what kind of coverage or alternative you should seek out.
Yeah, I think when we look at maybe just sheer numbers in that first bucket of people who can get a free or nearly free, just highly subsidized plan on the marketplace, that's going to be individuals who are making something in the vicinity of 75,000 or less and married, filing jointly. Those people that are, I think, in that 100,000 to 120,000 range. So if that's you, then yeah, you may be able to get a pretty heavily subsidized plan. If you make a lot less than that, I believe they have you on Medicaid or some other kind of government program. And if you make a lot more, then yeah, obviously you don't get any kind of subsidy. So there's that sweet spot. And then on that third bucket, you're talking about high utilization type of folks. I think the last stat I read was, don't quote me on this being completely accurate, about 10% of insured Americans will actually meet their deductible on any given year, on average. A lot of deductibles now are higher, 5,000 to 10,000 or something like that. So the people who are doing really high utilization, it's not a huge chunk of the population. It does happen for people, and it's not necessarily the same people. It's not the same 10% every year. But that middle bucket there of people who are just looking for something that's in case of an emergency, in case of some big catastrophe, I get a heart attack, I'm in the ER for something, whatever, I get hurt hiking and break my leg and have to get some quick surgery. That's going to be most people that are going to fall in that category. And for them, you're saying a health share is probably going to serve a little better than the other options because you've just run the math on it. It's just, this isn't necessarily talking about what quality of this or that. You're just looking at dollars and cents and saying, look, from a dollars and cents perspective, this is just going to work the best.
Yeah. Once we get into quality, health shares, I'll say that not all health shares are created equal, but if you take the best health shares, quality goes through the roof compared to most people's experience with traditional insurance. But yeah, just from a dollars and cents perspective, health shares for the vast majority of the population are going to win. And yeah, also don't quote me on this. I wish I could remember the exact number, but it's something like 5% of the population consumes 90% of the healthcare, right? You have that Pareto distribution. So most people are not the 5%. If you're not the 5%, you probably don't want to be on traditional insurance because traditional health insurance, in my opinion, isn't even real insurance. It's because if you think about insurance, think about other kinds of insurance like car insurance or home insurance. You almost never use it. You only use it when something really terrible happens. And so it's a low monthly cost that you pay to insure yourself against an unlikely but large catastrophic expense. Health insurance used to work that way, in 1945. Now it works in almost exactly the opposite way, where you pay a huge monthly cost for something that covers flu shots and generic medications and all of these extremely inexpensive transactions. You might think initially it's like, well, that kind of sounds like a good thing to have something that covers more. Like, is that such a bad thing? But the answer is yes, it absolutely is. Because anytime you have a middleman as a part of a transaction, that transaction is going to grow. It's always going to be cheaper to pay your mechanic to do your oil change than it is to pay Geico to pay your mechanic to do your oil change. The exact same thing is true with health insurance, magnified for a lot of different reasons that we can get into. But health insurance inflates the cost of healthcare. You don't want it covering all of these small and expensive transactions. Health insurance would be way better if it only covered the big bad medical expenses. And if you almost never used it, just like you almost never use your car insurance or home insurance, because then the monthly cost would come way down. You can pay out of pocket for your flu shots and your checkups and, all of these super inexpensive things, no problem. Over a year, over 10 years, over 100 years, the math is very sound. Most people will come out way ahead with an approach like that. Health shares just happen to fit that almost perfectly. They are for those large catastrophic expenses. They don't cover as much of the, kind of routine generic stuff, depending on what exact plan you get. We often recommend the ones that don't cover as much of that routine stuff because you can pay for that very inexpensively out of pocket and save your health share for just the big bad medical bills. There are a lot of reasons why traditional health insurance doesn't operate like real insurance anymore. And health shares, even though they're explicitly not insurance, they actually work a lot more like health insurance used to work back in the day.
If only there was only one middleman in your scenario there. Health insurance has got about 1 trillion people siphoning off, at every transaction. It has to stop along the way, and this convoluted just mess. But to your point, health share looks a lot more like health insurance used to look, and it also costs a lot less like health insurance used to. I remember even just when I had to start adulting about 20 years ago and get my own insurance. I was married in 2008, and when we got our first plan together, I think it was about $300 a month, and it was if I remember right, a $500 deductible. Good night. You'll never find anything close to that anymore. That was just in 2008. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, was it the Affordable Care Act that required all insurance to be more, what you're describing, comprehensive and less catastrophic only? Is that sort of a recent development legally?
Legally, yes. Regardless of the legal landscape, you could foresee people want more things to be covered. They want less responsibility. They want to outsource their responsibility to some larger organization or institution and would love to just have things handed to them on a silver platter. And so the consumer demand for more things to be covered, I think, has always been there. It's steadily crept up since the 1940s. And then the ACA cemented it from a legal standpoint that now you have to cover from day one for pre-existing conditions. And there's a schedule of essential health benefits that insurers have to cover with no annual or lifetime dollar limits. And there's a schedule of preventive care that has to be covered with no cost sharing. Those are some of the big legal innovations that the ACA mandated.
So when we're talking about cost of going with a health share or some other uninsurance versus using insurance, we've talked in the past about the double cost, if you will. There's the cost to get the coverage or access it, the participation cost, and that would be in insurance terms, your premium, or in your health share terms, your contribution. And then there's the utilization cost, what it costs to use. And with insurance, you have these $5,000, $10,000 deductible plans. You have to spend a whole lot before the insurance will do anything for you. In both instances, insurance is quite a bit more expensive. So even if you have a fully subsidized plan and you get legit free healthcare plan, it might cost less on that participation and that, access to coverage, but it could still end up costing you a whole lot more in the event that you actually have to use it for some sort of significant expense, if I'm understanding that right.
That's exactly right. There are two numbers to compare when you're trying to pick a coverage for yourself. There's your guaranteed monthly cost, and there's your potential out-of-pocket cost. And you want to find whatever option is going to best straddle the line and keep both of those numbers, when you total them together, the lowest. And the crazy thing is, the very low monthly cost, higher potential out-of-pocket costs tend to be the best option over the long run for most people. Unless you're a very high utilizer, even then though, especially if you're going with traditional insurance, people get raked over the coals by thinking that a low deductible gold plan is better than a high deductible bronze plan, just because of the psychology of like gold is better than bronze and low deductible, that seems better. When we run the simulations and we do the math, and you can even just like back of the napkin do it really quick. I have a friend who his wife is on some crazy specialty medications. Every year they hit their out-of-pocket max at the first week of the year. She consumes between $300,000 and $700,000 a year in healthcare expenses. So very, very like outlier edge case, high utilization. And they've been on low deductible gold plan for a long time. And he was scared to leave his employer actually, because he was getting it through his employer. And he's like, this is the best health insurance. We ran the numbers, and it is much cheaper for them to get a high deductible bronze plan, even though they know they're going to hit their out-of-pocket max at the beginning of the year. And even though the out-of-pocket max is higher on the bronze plan, it's still cheaper because the premiums on the bronze plan are so much less than on the gold plan. Insurance companies are sneaky, and I think they make a lot of money off of people who get gold plans. You can always run the numbers for yourself. This isn't a hard and fast rule, but it's a pretty good general rule of thumb. Lower guaranteed cost, higher out-of-pocket cost tends to perform better.
Right, because that's the guaranteed versus the potential. You know you're paying the premium. You don't know if you'll hit that deductible or the IUA in the case of a health share.
Even if you do, it's still often cheaper.
Yeah, for sure. So the last thing I wanted to ask about is, I'm familiar with Common Care and the tool that you've built about helping people evaluate the cost of plans. And like you talk about, it's not just the upfront cost, but the longer term, what would this cost based on your consumption of healthcare? From what we've talked about, who would this apply to? Would it be, I'm the self-employed individual who doesn't have an employer and I'm looking for something, I would go to Common Care to find something, or I'm the employer looking at options to provide my employees, I'm going to go to Common Care to evaluate those options? Or is it all of the above? Who is it kind of geared towards?
So we've built everything that we've built for employers and employees, but incidentally, some of the tools are super helpful for individuals, and we've chosen to just make those publicly accessible and free. So for any individual, they can go to commoncare.org/marketplace and get access to all of our tools completely free, no login or anything. You can just use it.
How would someone reach out or connect if they've found this conversation helpful or interesting? Pretty much anyone can go to commoncare.org, and is that going to be the best way to get in touch and connect?
Yep. Go to commoncare.org, and if you go to commoncare.org/marketplace, that's specifically the tool that will be most useful for most people.
For those individuals. So that's super helpful. Mark, really appreciate you taking the time to meet with us and enlighten me. I found that very interesting. I'm always learning every time I talk to someone. So thanks for being with us. And if anyone wants to reach out, again, commoncare.org. Also, you're fairly active on LinkedIn. They could find you there as well.
Yeah. Yep. For sure.
Again, thanks for coming on the show, and we'll see y'all next time.
Awesome. Thank you.